So the M2 MacBook Air has been out for a little over 4 months now, and I wanted to share my experience with this device. I've been using it as not only my daily laptop, but also my daily desktop computer, which you can see behind me, and my overall synopsis is that this thing is pretty amazing, I'm not gonna lie to you. But is it the laptop that I'm gonna recommend the most? Let's talk about it. So let's quickly go over the spec that I went with on the M2 MacBook Air. So as you can see, I did go with that blue, that midnight blue colorway, which is absolutely gorgeous. Yes, everybody that mentioned the fingerprint magnet feature of this laptop is correct. This is a fingerprint magnet. So be aware, it's nothing that a microfiber cloth and a quick spray of water can't fix, but do be aware that it does attract a lot of fingerprints. And also depending on how the light hits it, it goes into a darker black color or more of a lighter blue. So I love this actual color, and it's the closest we've gotten to that matte black MacBook from about 10-15 years ago now at this point, which I'll show you right now. And then in terms of the actual spec that I got, the only thing I upgraded was the RAM. I went from, instead of the 8 gig baseline RAM, I went to 16 gigs of RAM, but I still have 256 gigs of storage. I got the baseline M2 chip, so it's not a 10-core GPU, it's just an 8-core GPU. But again, that's pretty much all we need, which I'll show you guys as this video goes on. And also just to let you guys know, from a accessory standpoint on the laptop itself, I don't do too much, but I do have a Moft stand on the bottom, which I mentioned in my MacBook Air accessories video if you guys do want to check that out. But that is the only thing I have on the laptop, and it's just a little origami stand that lets me change my viewing angles when I'm using it in laptop mode. So now that we got the design out of the way, let's talk about the performance of this M2 MacBook Air and how it's held up over these last 4 months. Now, I'm not going to sit here and bore you with Geekbench scores and other statistics that don't really matter, but what I am going to do is walk you guys through pretty much my low intensity tasks and then my more higher intensity tasks, and let you guys know what I use this laptop for on a daily basis to see if it's going to run with what you plan on using this laptop for. So like I said, the first tasks are all kind of lower intensity tasks, right? They're word processing, it's iMessage, it's email, it's watching the occasional YouTube video, streaming on Netflix. It's working in the Google Suite online, right, with shared Sheets files and shared slide files. Other things like being able to have multiple YouTube videos running at the same time, or a Discord chat and a YouTube video running at the same time. This thing is an absolute beast. And all these tasks, it can run flawlessly, and it should for the price point of $1,200. But it still is incredible. I know now we're a little bit numb to it because two and a half years ago, the M1 MacBook Air came out, and it wowed us with the speed, especially when opening up applications that weren't even first-party applications. But this thing, 2.5 years later, in the M2 version of it, everything opens extremely snappy. It opens immediately, whether it is an Apple-specific app or a third-party application. Everything just opens so quickly, and it is rather impressive. So if you're planning on using this M2 MacBook Air as just kind of a lower intensity task kind of application machine, this laptop is going to run circles around all those applications and all those tasks that you need it to do. But when it comes to a little bit more high intensity, right? So some of the things that I use it for that are asking a little bit more, especially out of the GPU and CPU, are things like running the Microsoft Suite and opening multiple instances of these applications. So if I have multiple Excel applications open or instances of that application with tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands of lines, I do remember the M1 MacBook Air kind of stuttering a little bit, or at least slowly opening up or slowly loading all that data. But with the M2 MacBook Air, there still is a little bit of a delay when it comes to those huge files in terms of Excel files, but overall it runs everything extremely smoothly, and at no point am I waiting for things to load, at no point am I scrolling and then having to wait for all the data to populate. So keep that in mind if you are a Microsoft Suite user, that for the most part, and definitely stay subscribed because we will have a Microsoft Office on macOS series coming soon, because I am testing out all the differences between Microsoft on an Apple product and Microsoft on a Windows product. But for the most part, you'll be able to do everything that you do in your Microsoft Suite on a Windows computer. You'll be able to do that on your M2 computer. Some other more intense uses are actually gaming on this thing. So I am a subscriber of Apple One, I do get Apple Arcade. So Apple Arcade on the M2 MacBook Air and the games that come from it are freaking amazing. And now that we have native controller support like Xbox, PlayStation, and even Switch controller support, it is an absolute game changer. So you'll see me playing NBA 2K, you'll see me playing a lot of Call of Duty on here. I am a casual gamer. I wouldn't go out and do an esports tournament because this is only a 60 Hz panel. It is an LCD panel. So if you need that 120, 144, or even higher in terms of refresh rate on your screen, this isn't going to be for you. But if you're a casual gamer, like you be a pro or you play online a little bit just to pass the time, then this is going to do wonders for gaming. And a lot of people say that Apple computers aren't for gaming, but this laptop has really surprised me when it comes to gaming, especially with the feel of it gives you a console feel. So I don't feel like I'm missing anything by not having an Xbox or not having a PlayStation right now. And now I know that a lot of people are going to be asking, how is this for video editing? How is this for photo editing? How is this for YouTube and creative work and things like that? And for the most part, my answer is that it will be able to handle pretty much anything you throw at it. I personally edit everything on my iPad, so I don't do any, creative tasks. So all my thumbnails, all my images, all my photos, all my videography, all my editing, all that is done on my iPad, and none of that is actually brought onto my M2 MacBook Air. But I have played with iMovie, and iMovie renders and exports things extremely fast, and even things like LumaFusion. LumaFusion was built to run on a MacBook, so LumaFusion on the M2 MacBook Air runs extremely smooth. And I've seen people have multiple instances of 4K 60 footage in their timeline and it's scrubbing in real time, multiple audio tracks at the same time, running on the baseline MacBook Air, which means you only have 256 gigs of storage and 8 gigs of RAM, and it doesn't stutter. Now, if you get into more ProRes, into 8K footage, into all the different formats that exist out there, then maybe it will slow down, and maybe you should be looking at a MacBook Pro at that point, because again, this isn't made for video editing, it just happens to be able to do that and do it extremely well. But if you're somebody that just likes to run a YouTube channel on the side, or just to edit some video or some footage of like a long weekend just to have at the house, this thing is going to be more than fine, either if you use iMovie or Final Cut, or even things like Adobe Premiere, or even LumaFusion works on here, because it does work with iPad and iPhone apps, at least some instances of it. And then the last thing that I want to mention about this M2 Air is, who is this for, and would I recommend it to most people getting their first laptop or their first MacBook in general, somebody that's going to take it to go to school and things like that, or even people that are on a budget? Is this the computer that I would recommend? Long story short, especially if you're on a budget and you want to get the most bang for your buck, I'm going to still recommend the M1 MacBook Air, because there hasn't really been any instance that I threw something at the M1 MacBook Air that I was like, oh man, I wish I had the M2 Air so I could run this a little bit smoother. Most things that run, for my instances at least, on the M2 Air will run on the M1 MacBook Air with literally zero issues. I had that M1 MacBook Air for 2 years before I went to the M2 MacBook Air, and that thing worked like a champ. And that M1 MacBook Air only had 8 gigs of RAM because I went with the base model. So if you look at just the retail pricing of these two laptops, so the M1 MacBook Air, yes, it's about 2.5 years old now at this point, and it retails for $999. And then you have the M2 MacBook Air, which came out about 4 months ago, and that retails for $1199. So that's a $200 difference. And in that $200 difference, you are getting some notable upgrades. So I'm going to list these out, and you tell me in the comments down below if this is worth $200 for you. So first off is the new design. So it does fit that new aesthetic of the MacBook Pros, a little bit more squared off, and it just fits the new wave of where Apple's going. The wedge design is no longer there. So if you do love the wedge design, then you got to stick with the M1 MacBook Air. The second thing that was upgraded is the screen size. So not the screen quality or resolution or anything like that, it's just the screen size. So it went from 13.3 inches to 13.6 inches, and you do get a new notch on the M2 MacBook Air to fit that design language of what they did on the M1 Pro and the M1 Max MacBook Pros on that side of the lineup. And then if you are really pixel peeping, I think you get an extra 40 pixels in terms of height on the 13.6 inch M2 MacBook Air versus the M1 MacBook Air. But again, the quality is the same. It's still the same pixel density, it's still the same quality of pixels, it's still the same LCD display, just a little bit bigger. Another thing that was upgraded a little bit, you do have 500 nits of brightness on the display versus 400 nits of brightness on the M1 MacBook Air. Another little thing to consider, but at the same time, if the glare was too much for the M1 MacBook Air and you're outside working, the glare is probably going to be too much for the M2 MacBook Air. Like if we went from 400 to 800 or 1000, then that's a different story. But 400 to 500, nothing really to write home about there. And then there's actually 3 tangible differences. The other ones were the screen was a little bit bigger, so it is a little bit different and it visually looks different. But when it comes to actually productivity gains, you do get a new webcam for a FaceTime web camera in that notch. So we go from 720p to 1080p. It's a fine webcam. Like I still use an external webcam behind me, as you guys can see, because I do have my laptop in clamshell mode most of the time. But it is there if you need it. You also get an upgraded speaker system, so you go from just stereo sound to now a quad speaker system, which is very similar to what the iPad Pro has. You also get spatial audio, you get Dolby Atmos, so it's just an upgraded speaker system, and it is very robust. So I do notice a speaker difference, but it's not often that I'm blasting music from my M2 MacBook Air. At that point, I'm using one of my Bluetooth speakers, like this Marshall one that I have behind me. And then lastly, they did bring back MagSafe charging, which does 2 positive things in my opinion. One, it allows for 67 watt fast charging. That 67 watt brick does not come in the box. You only get a 30 watt brick base, or you can pay a little extra to get a 35 watt brick, but it is capable of 67 watt fast charging. But take it from me, I have not used the MagSafe charger once. The MagSafe charger is still in the packaging. It's still all laced up. Like the MagSafe cable has not been used a single time. But it does open up the ability to now have 2 extra Thunderbolt ports. Whereas before with the M1 MacBook Air, if you needed to charge, you would take up one of those ports immediately, but now you can charge with the MagSafe charger, and then you have 2 available ports. But one big limitation to consider about both the M1 and the M2 MacBook Airs is that with those Thunderbolt ports, you can only do video out to one external display. But with the M1 Pro, M1 Max, and then probably the future M2 Pro and M2 Max, you will be able to do up to 3 or maybe even 4 external monitors. But just keep that in mind that even if you get the brand new M2 MacBook Air fully loaded, you still can only go to 1 external monitor. So like I said, leave a comment down below if you think these upgrades that I mentioned between the M1 to the M2 MacBook Air are worth that $200 price point or that price hike. Because if you don't really care about the new look, if you don't care about MagSafe, then from a price to performance ratio, that M1 MacBook Air is an absolute steal if you think about it. Especially now with these Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and holiday deals that are happening. I've seen Amazon have that M1 MacBook Air for as low as $799. So think about that. For the price of an 11-inch iPad Pro, you can have an M1 MacBook Air that already has a keyboard, that has Mac OS, that is a lot more familiar. So that's what I meant when I said from a price to performance ratio, the M1 MacBook Air is still the laptop that I recommend to most people, especially people on a budget. But if you do care about aesthetic, if you do care about the look, and I do think the new M2 Air looks better than the M1 Air, but roast me in the comments down below if you don't think that's the case. But if that's worth $200 for you, then by all means, jump on that one. But there's also deals on Amazon where I've seen it as low as $1,050. So $150 off the M2 Air, which I'll link down below, and then $200 off the M1 Air, which I'll also link down below. But overall, these computers are amazing. We can't go wrong with either of them. It's just a matter of what look you prefer when it comes to these laptops. And if you need, the faster charging or that extra 0.3 inches of screen real estate when it comes to the M2 Air. But that's gonna do it for this video, everybody. If you enjoyed, leave a little dolphin in the comments down below so I know that you made it to the end. And let me know in the comments if you had to pick, which one would you choose? And again, keep in mind the price points. Like if you could save $200 and get an M1 MacBook Air like ready to go, then that could be a good choice. And you can use that $200 to spend on maybe an external SSD, because the storage spaces on these laptops are insane. For $200, you can get at least a 1 terabyte, maybe even a 2 terabyte SSD, and like a really quality one from Amazon. And then at that point, you got the M1 MacBook Air with 2 terabytes of external storage, and you'll be absolutely golden. But that's gonna do it, everybody. If you guys wanna watch some more macOS, iOS, or iPadOS videos, click on one of these right here. But until next time, I'm Fernando. Definitely stay subscribed because we got some more awesome videos coming. And until next time, peace.